My name's Greta, and I'm here with Captain Ned Files, and we're here to talk about the graveyard of broken boating dreams. Over a series of interviews, we're going to look at various boats that Ned has been on as a boating instructor, gotten on board, and discovered problems with vessels that have been owned for as little as a week, or sometimes 3 days.
Yeah, true.
So, the first one we're going to focus on is one that we most recently jumped on board. Can you tell me a little bit maybe about the boat itself and where it came from?
Obviously, everything we do in this space is general knowledge, information. We're not going to say specifics about the boat, because the reason I'm not going to say specifically about the boat is because people buy boats with all the right intention, and then they come across these hiccups and challenges, and it can be a little bit upsetting. No, we're not going to name boats, names where they are. But for example, this may have been a Sea Ray 34 with a flybridge boat, and we, as a boating instructor, which is all too often, I'll get on a boat and find an issue.
So do you know where he bought this boat from?
Yes, he purchased this boat from Sydney, and then it was trucked down. Obviously, being a flybridge, it had to have quite a lot of stuff dismantled and then re-put back on. Mm-hmm. So that was actually that process was commissioned by the yard's local boat builder. The boat builder looked through the survey of the boat.
So there was a survey that
there was a survey, and the boat builder, who doesn't sugarcoat things for people, which is what you want in your contractors. You want people that don't tell you what they think you want to hear. They tell you what you need to know. And I think he had a look at the survey before the boat was delivered, and he said to the owner at the time, "Are you sure you really want to buy this boat? You want to go through with this?" But obviously the price point seemed so low that, I'll start with the cheap boat and see how we worked with. This owner was of the mind of, I want to get into boating, but I'll start with a cheap boat first and just see if I like boating. Mm-hmm.
So do you know how much approximately he
I think he got it for just about 120,000, which seems like an expensive boat. But let's start the story of why there's no such thing as a cheap boat, eh? I guess that's where you're going with this, Greta.
Absolutely. So then, if I have the story correct, so we organised to do boating instruction with him. Yep. We do 3 sessions over 3 different days. Mm-hmm. So you jumped on board to do the first day, which went okay.
There was a few little, I could sense that my spidey senses were tingling, but we did the engine checks, and this is an inboard petrol boat, which is, I'll be quite honest, is not my favourite. Mm. And then we came back to do the next session.
Okay, so session 2 was scheduled and booked in.
Session 2 was scheduled, booked in. Went there, he had his kids on board at the time. They were sort of older, sort of mid-teens. And we couldn't keep the port engine running. The port engine would shut down, shut down. I said, well, I can't guarantee this engine's going to stay running, so you need to get a mechanic down to have a look. He called me a couple of days later saying that the mechanic said basically the port engine was needing to be rebuilt. It had dropped a cylinder, it's losing compression, this is why it wasn't starting. So then he said it was 5 months? I think it was about 5 months, wasn't it, from our records?
It was at least 5 months.
So 5 months for him to have that done, because obviously that was happening right in the middle of the boating season, summer season, so getting mechanics to do anything at that time of year was not fun. And also he had older engines, 90s model engines, Mercruisers, so getting parts was problematic at that time as well. So it took him 5 months before he could get the boat up and running again.
Okay. And so do we know in an estimate how much? So we know it cost him in time.
I think he's probably, the engine rebuild would have been, I'd say, look, conservatively, I'd say 15,000 would be a conservative estimate on that. Okay. Once you've pulled the engine out, it sounds like a lot to rebuild a big, medium block V8 engine, because they're basically a marinized car engine. like a, you know, if you took a Chevy, a big block Chev off to get rebuilt, you'd probably expect it to be, you know, $5,000-$6,000. But obviously getting both things in and out of a boat has a huge amount of complexity, and I'll warn you now that anything with the word marine in it, it's going to be 30% more with your eyes closed. So I'd say 15 to 20 would have been the budget on that one.
Okay.
Conservatively, yeah.
Okay. And so then we fast forward to when the port engine was all finished and back in the boat. And I believe the engine started, you made it out onto the bay.
Yeah, engine started, went through the process. He had bow and stern thrusters, they were all working. Got out into the bay, and in that style of boat, you have a hull to deck joint. So the way boats are built, modern boats are built, is the hull is moulded, and then the structure of the hull is put into that skin, and that's all glassed in. And then what they'll do is they'll actually put all the engines and things in, and a lot of the cabinetry in that, before they put the boat, the deck mould on top. And there's what's called the hull to deck joint. There's a joint which runs around, and you'll see that on most boats. You'll look at most fiberglass boats, and there'll be like where the rubbing rail is. It's like where there's a rubber with a metal embedded, and you'll see it running around the boat. And that usually shows where the hull to deck joint is as well, where the deck is joint to the hull. But this boat in particular, and like a lot of boats of this design, the hull to deck joint goes right down and along the where the swim platform is. So we went out into the water, and then we're belting along, and then I start playing with the bilge pumps, and then the aft bilge alarm went off. So I said to the owner, "You keep driving over and have a look." So I went down and had a look, and as I said, the hull to deck joint was really quite close to the waterline at the transom at the rear of this boat. And what had happened is that seal between the hull to deck joint had failed, and realistically it should have been a glassed joint being that close to the waterline, but there's no hard and fast rule in the way these boats are put together. So they'd used a sicker bead and screws and fastenings to seal it. So the sicker had perished and dried and got brittle and basically fallen out of this gap. So what was happening as we went up into the plane, that water's coming up the transom, it's going up under the swim platform and just hitting that lip, and it was getting redirected, basically scooped by the deck joint sitting over the top of the hull joint. So water's coming up that section and getting scooped and funneled back into the boat. So the faster we went, the faster we would sink, basically.
Not ideal.
So we came off the plane, which meant that the boat levelled out in the water, and it got that hull to deck joint just out of the water. We were motoring back. We were still getting some water in, but without that bilge alarm, thankfully the bilge alarm worked. Because without that bilge alarm, we would have been, the next bilge alarm was in the engine room. So the boat, the hull, underwater section of the boat would have been noticeably sinking before we would have known about it.
Wow.
So that was a saving grace in that respect. We got back, and then I got the boat builder to come down and have a look. So then that boat had to come out of the water again. So he had to grind out all that area, and they ground the inside of the hull to deck joint, and they fiberglassed. They fully knitted the hull to deck joint, and they fully knitted it. And then you looked at the outside, and it looked very similar, just a lot neater, and there's a sicker bead at that. But on the inside, it's been ground back and fully glassed and fully stitched in until we get about, I think he went as far as about a metre above the waterline. So he went all the way back around and up there. So I'm thinking 7 to 10K on that one. So when I say something to something, it's usually that figure is gone, and we're somewhere between that. So I'd say that's where we are.
And do you recall approximate time frame, like how long it took?
Oh, that was pretty quick. I think he turned it around in about a fortnight to do that, which was pretty good.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, cool. And then so then we rescheduled.
Both engines started. Let's start it from the start. We went down. We had to get refuel. So both engines started. Bang, bang. I got down there and the boat's running and he's smiling like, yeah, it's all good. I'm like, yeah, let's do this because we've been through all this Goat Week stuff. Let's get out and actually. And the plan was, all right, we're going to go out. We're just going to take this boat for a decent run. Okay, let's get some fuel. We've got to do refueling. So I went to the fuel dock, got the fuel, and I'm like, now hang on, there was something else. Yeah, we lost the steering. So the steering had work done on it, and often when you touch older things and you reprime them and repressurize them, something will let go. So this is what's happened. The steering's lost pressure. So I'm like, okay, well, spinning the steering wheel, there's nothing happening. So I managed to get the rudders straight. I'm like, we're okay. We've got 2 engines. I can drive a boat on 2 engines and 2 thrusters. We don't need the steering to manoeuvre around to the pen. So the same boat builder, his offsiders came down. They said, fabulous, take it round to the pen. We'll meet you there with the hydraulic pump and we'll go and reprime the steering. I'm like, fabulous. All right, I said to the owner, jump upstairs and start the engine. He turned the starboard key and this almighty noise came out. I knew exactly what it was the moment it happened. The starter motor had just... We tried to start it and I'm like, nah, stop. Because you can chew out a starter motor cog. You can replace it. But when you chew out the ring gear, the actual cog that fits on the flywheel, that's like an engine out kind of job, just to replace that. It's like a big thing. So I went, no, stop. So I said, all right, get the mechanics down. They came down, had a look, and they're, oh yeah, and they say, oh, it could be this, and it could be that. I'm like, yeah, well, just let them get to it in their own time. Sure enough, oh, it's the starter motor. It's not throwing in properly. Oh yeah, righto. The problem is, but I knew what had happened, but they came down and they had to push the start button about 4 or 5 times to go, oh yeah, and I'm thinking, if they took one of those teeth off,
Yeah.
you know, anyway, so we couldn't get round to the pen, so we actually walked it round into the, we're at the fuel dock, so we walked it round into the visitor's berth, and luckily, once again, winter, this all happened during winter, so we weren't in the way of anyone. So anyway, got that fixed, they pulled the starter motor off. Anyway, they restored the starter motor and greased it up and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so that was, and then I had to leave, okay, when we found that problem.
So on that one, so it didn't take too long to fix it?
No, it was pretty quick.
Would we have like an approximate cost?
Oh, it probably would have cost him about $1,500
okay.
to get that done, yeah, in time and mucking around. Anyway, so we get back to the boat.
All right, so now we've rescheduled.
This is the longest 3-day course I've run this year.
So this
we
is
get
the
back to the boat.
Fourth visit to the boat.
Yeah. So we get back to the boat, and the port engine. Remember, the port engine's been rebuilt. Right, port engine's been rebuilt.
Yeah.
So we start up the boat. It's all good. That's nice. And I said, right, let's do a sea trial. Let's go out and do a proper sea trial on this boat. Anyway, we started up, and the starboard sounding a little bit whack. I'm like, there's a bit of a knock there. I'm not, and I said, shut down the port engine, start up the starboard engine, and the starter motor was engaging, but occasionally and I thought, no, I want to shut it down. And I thought, no, let's just leave it running because the starter motor's going to let go again. I could hear that the starter motor was going to let go. So he fires up, started, and I'm like, oh, she's a bit smoky. And I thought, okay, we've got to go out. And I rang Jared and said, Jared, look, this is what's happening, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, okay. And I said, look, should we go and take it for a sea trial? And he said, yeah, take it for a sea trial. If it's one of 3 things that I think it could be, it's not like, even if you limped it all the way over to us, I'd be doing exactly the same thing. So it's better you do the diagnostic for me while you're there, Ned. Anyway, we get out and get it up on the plane, and this thing is just blowing steam. Like, it is just out the starboard engine exhaust is just like, it looks like a steamship. Oh. It's just steam pouring out the starboard engine. It's obviously something's gone horribly wrong. Now, sometimes when it's really cold, you'll get steam because you'll get the exhaust doesn't often, in a lot of boats, doesn't often just go out from the mixing elbows straight out to the back of the boat. Mm-hmm. It'll often go through like a mud box, which is like a sort of a muffler system for those that don't really... So the exhaust goes into that, and then all that exhaust and water fires around and through that. But when that's sitting, that water still sits in there, so it's really cold. So you get hot exhaust, cold water, and you'll get a big boost of steam on a cold morning, coming back. But this was something else. This was like, and then I started noticing the colour of the smoke changing from a steamy white to a darker grey. And I'm like, that's oil and water and all sorts of stuff. So I went, okay, limp back. And yeah, and I rang Jared and said, what do you think? He said, that's not good. And as yet, we haven't heard back.
Okay.
So
that's still ongoing. That's
still ongoing.
But the end of the story at this point is
the story has no end.
Is that we know a guy who bought a boat for all the right reasons.
Absolutely for the right reasons, Grady, you're correct. He bought it because he loves scuba diving. He wanted a boat for the bay so he could go out with his kids and go diving and have something that he could crash out on and camp out on and all that sort of stuff. But what he did is he's not, it's not a matter of he was buying to a price. He bought to, like I said, I'll just get an inexpensive boat to see what it's like the first time. I can see that boat, he's ironing out some bugs. He's probably going to have to rebuild. The starboard engine's going to have to rebuild. There's no sugarcoating it if he wants to do it right. But the problem is the mechanic should have done it there and then, because what had happened is previously in the boat's history, the starboard engine had been rebuilt. And people go, oh, well, that's good. At least one, if there was a problem. But hang on, both engines have deteriorated over the same amount of time. If you come up to a boat and it's like, one of the engines has been rebuilt, oh, it's great. Oh, they just put a new stern drive on it, had a few problems, but they swapped everything out and they got a new engine in there. That's a problem. That's a boat that hasn't been owned under preventative maintenance mindset. If your boat has been owned under preventative maintenance mindset, I don't care if it was built in the 1960s or the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, it doesn't matter. If it's been owned under a preventative maintenance mindset, everything deteriorates at the same time. It all goes down at the same time and it has to be rebuilt at the same time.
Then if you do one thing,
you should do both.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you don't do both,
yeah,
then...
it's like when Theo rebuilt his boat, he had in mind that he would eventually rebuild the engines. He did it a little sooner than he wanted to, but he did both because, like, what's the point? Like, it's one machine is no machine. It's sort of, but and then the owner of this, let's call it a Sea Ray, did actually say to me, he said, why didn't they advise me to do both engines at once? And he said, maybe it's because I assumed that the starboard engine had been rebuilt, that it would be in good condition, but you know, it's...
Thank you so much for your time.
No worries.
That's been awesome and very informative, and we'll see you again for the next one.
Brilliant. Cheers.